Well, hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Lisa Melandri. I'm the director here at the Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis. You are sitting in the middle of the exhibition Jeremy Deller, Joy and People. And many of you may even have heard me say this before, but one of my very favorite quotes from the artist is that art isn't always just what you make. Art can be what you make happen. And Jeremy is an artist who has been incredibly interested in parade culture, in reenactments, in creating opportunities for people of all different kinds and all different spaces to actually come together and make art through action. What you may not know is that you are sitting adjacent to, and you're more than welcome to actually go into, a parade float in and of itself. Valerie's snack shop was actually a kind of reproduction of a snack shop from Manchester, England. And Jeremy made this the central piece of a parade that he did, where people actually could be on the float, taking their tea and coming together. And the banners you see around you were also a part of this same thing. There's a video on the corner, on the counter of Valerie's, which shows you what this looked like in action, if you will. So when we were thinking about what we wanted to do for programs, how did we want to bring this work by Jeremy very much to our own city and to our own audience, I can tell you that one of the very, very first things that was told to me when I got here, I've been here for about 6 months, was that St. Louisans love their parades. And on top of that, I had heard that the parades in the the floats, in the Veiled Prophet Parade were some of the most wonderful, and that this was a venerable, venerable institution, one of the longest running parades in the United States. And I got here after last year's parade, but you can bet I won't miss it this time around. So it seemed a perfect natural parallel to invite William Griffin here to talk about the Veiled Prophet Parade, his work there as artistic director, and to kind of bring this larger context of Jeremy's work and Jeremy's activity as an artist right back to our own backyard in our city. So thank you all for coming. I will tell you that these tea talks, and indeed you are invited, please feel free to get a cup while you're here listening. You're more than welcome. We'll continue on throughout the exhibition. And on your way out, please do grab a newsletter which will give you the full range of programs, activities, and talks. And it will be more of this kind of wonderful chance to find, access into the works on view. But without further ado, it is my great pleasure to have William take us through the history, the grandeur, and the beauty of the Veiled Prophet Parade. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And thank you all for coming. It makes me feel really good to see so many friendly faces here. The people I know and that I work with, a lot of the volunteers that I'm going to talk about in this are in this room today, and I want to hand it back to all of you at the end of this, maybe, if you don't heckle me too much. Parade. I'm going to talk about parade culture in St. Louis in general. We've got a lot of parades in St. Louis, as you all know, but the one I'm going to talk about today is one of the oldest ones in the country, as Lisa said. Hi, Nelson, you're late. And this parade, back in 1878, there were a group of St. Louis businessmen that wanted to put on a parade and festival to draw national attention to this city, St. Louis. And after 135 years, it still remains a gift to the city. In other words, it's a non-commercial parade, which means a lot of things to the artist, which is kind of what I'm here to talk about too. It means a lot of creative freedom, which really drew me to it, because there's not like a corporate agenda. Many of the large parades in the country have corporate agendas, and this is just great. Whatever we want to make a parade about, which we cover a lot of different subjects from different themes through different years about it. Now, in the history of this Veil Prophet Parade in St. Louis. Our first floats were brought up from New Orleans. They were purchased and they were brought up on barges actually by a man that's in this room. It was his great-grandfather that brought the floats up. They did miss a few parades during World War I and World War II, but through the Depression and everything else, they've put this great festival on. And for the past 100 years, for the first 100 years, it was a fall festival. And then in the mid-'60s, it moved to a daytime parade. And then in 1981, they moved the parade to the 4th of July. And then they revamped the festival part of it with what was called the VP Fair, which now we're calling it Fair St. Louis. On some of these facts that I spit out here, I kind of thought we could have a fact-checking session after this if I don't give it right. But so then, my involvement with parade culture here in St. Louis, well, I started as a student at Washington U, and my sculpture instructor, Richard Doomey, was sending students down here. Actually, he was involved with the parade. He was involved as chairman of the parade committee, and he was sending students down to work on floats. And I was in his sculpture class, so I went down there and just like fell in love with it. 17 years as a sculptor there passed by, and then I was invited to do, in 1988, I was invited to start designing the floats and become the artistic director. And to me, that was a more significant opportunity to make art for people and the community on a large scale. And, I've loved the entire process all the way through. The floats are large sculptures, and the event is a very large event, the parade. And through the years, we've had, what did I do, mix up my pages here? Well, through the years, the floats have been designed and reinvented by a lot of different artists. Back in the 20s and 30s, Oscar Burninghouse, who later became a Southwest artist. He lived his life in Taos, and he painted the American Indians, and lots of people that know art history will know his work. And then in the 50s, a guy named Fred Conway came along, and he was more of a modern artist, and he did parades, and really all of these floats that these fellows produced, you can see them on Google Image. You can see the floats that they actually designed, and of course you can see their paintings and their work, because they were prominent artists of their day. Now, for about 90 years, the floats were painted, and it was a nighttime parade, so the floats were laminated. In the beginning, they were laminated by people carrying flames on reflectors, and they were called the Flambeau Committee, and they illuminated the floats with that. And then along came electricity, and then they started building the floats on streetcars, and they would actually hook up with the electric overhead, and they were laminated with lights. And I think I got a picture of that. This is one of the early parades, and then this is the one of them with light bulbs, actually back in the 50s. So so when I got into this, for me, it was going to be my turn to reinvent the floats, and you got to think about the times and what's available and what people are interested in, and what is it you want to put out there. And it's really great having that creative freedom to just think of anything you can and just try to dazzle people with lots of things. So the first thing I did when I took over was the floats were covered through the 70s with sort of a floral plastic sheeting. And then when I started taking over, I wanted the floats to be sculptures, because that's what I was at the time, a sculptor. So we covered all the decks with styrofoam, like this, and then we carved the styrofoam. This is some of the carving. And then here's another one. I always like this picture. It looks like such a small float, but this is actually a 17-foot tall, 35-foot long float. But you can see how it was laminated and then carved. And then once the float got painted, this is what it looked like on the street. And of course, there were people on here. This is just in the morning before anything was really going on in the assembly area. And then, to keep the process of change going on, I started designing self-propelled floats. I visited the Rose Bowl builders and saw that they were also just a bunch of backyard engineers and mechanics. And so I started building big, giant chassis, and we'd take an old junk car and we'd cut the motor out of it and leave enough of the frame to weld it into the chassis. And then the chassis would get covered with styrofoam, and then we'd sculpt the whole thing and paint the whole thing. And then to continue this process of change, more lately, we've started putting performances into the concepts. Now, we're borrowing from parades around the country. Some of the parades, like the Rose Bowl, are very visual, but then over at Macy's, you have lots of performing, but generally some kind of a big-name star. We have a lot of stars, a lot of performers right here in St. Louis available to us. So, and this has been very successful. My experience with dance, say on floats, started with dancers that were models back at Washington U. And then from that, I joined Dance St. Louis, and I've seen all their shows over the years. And then I started painting dancers. I still do. And then I started putting dance on the floats. And we've had some success with that. And the last thing on me and my history, the number one question I've had probably for 35 years of doing this is, do you do this all year long? And I think people just don't realize what goes into it until they really get a look inside of it, which I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a look here today. Now, the rest of this talk I'm going to go into, I've divided the parade experience into three different things: the conception, the construction, and the presentation. Now, in the conception of the parade, first, like just in event planning, we have a whole lot of volunteers, and I think some of you people in here are some of my volunteers, I'm glad to see. But we have 23 committees, and they just have all sorts of things to be in charge of to build this infrastructure to produce this parade. And like street closures, logistics of moving the floats, even some of the stoplights have to be turned, and there's all kinds of, in the assembly to get everything together so it'll come together. And then on the designing float, the creative process in the conception stage of designing the floats, first, we start with written concepts, and we discuss, I love other people's ideas as well as my own to work with. And then thumbnail drawings are made, like there's a few of them on the board over there you can look at, and those are actual VP float designs with all the notes. Those are the thumbnails we do just to pull our ideas together and start. And then we make construction drawings, which are scale drawings that you can build right from. And then we look at music, all genres of music, particularly now, to put on floats. And then we look at dance performance to consider. Now, another thing we have to do is, just to be practical, is we look at our inventory that we have. We have 3 warehouses full of props that we've made over the years. And well, one thing I do want to say is like when we carve things out of styrofoam, we recycle everything we don't use. We send it back, and they cut it up, and they blow it into new styrofoam, and then we buy it back from them again. And working, so, we have to be practical. So even the Rose Bowl does that. They've got a barn full of props that they reuse. So what I'm going to show you with the next few slides is how we've turned some of the props into several different things. Now, this first photograph shows you a cat in a hat, and like I talked about, through the 70s, the floats were covered in floral sheeting. Well, this is what they look like. Well, then we turned that cat into a rabbit. So I got different sets of heads and feet and tails for this guy. Okay, then he became a cat. Now, he's a little bulked up. We sprayed foam on him, carved him, coated him, to give him a little more weight, and we needed a paintable surface when we moved around away from the floral sheeting. Now, and then he became a dog, and this was King Tut, or not King Tut, but King Pup, right? And we had like an Egyptian theme. And then that same dog became a rabbit again, only this time, his body's had been bulked up, so he had to have a new head and new feet. And then from there, we went back to being a dog, and this float was Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog. We had a Elvis lookalike singing, on the float, and it was just great fun. And now I'm going to focus on this big Cadillac. It was about 50 feet long, and so when you make something big like that, you want to use it more than once. So we built a car wash over it. Now this car wash, we played the music from Car Wash, the movie, and we had 9 animations on here with the brushes spinning and rolling and swiping back and forth. The clocks were all spinning. And then since we had that structure built over the Cadillac, we turned it into a time machine. And now, so the back of the float is 1959 and the front of the float is 2059. We'd added the jet engines and whatnot. Now, and then we went to a tailgate party with the Rams. And you can't see the back of the float, but we had barbecue grills and with smoke machines blowing. And so, you know, just trying to get the most out of it. Let me get myself caught up here. Oh, okay, then we had a butterfly float, and these big wings were animated. This is the big animation that I was talking about, what the floats were for a while. That was, the new thing was to make them bigger, longer, and animate them. Now that was turned into 2 dragonflies. All the hydraulics and structure were there. It's a self-propelled vehicle. It's got its own engine, and the dragonfly wings operated. So from that, well, now I want to talk about our construction team. We've got professional float builders, and we have a huge group of volunteers. Now, I try to design for what my resources are, and my resources are whatever artists I can get, and whatever volunteers I can get, and whatever their abilities are, and then I fill all their time that they want to come in and donate, and I fill all of we have a regular full-time staff at the Den. The Den is where we build the floats, and a lot of you in here know that. But we have artists that do graphic arts, sculptors, painters. We have craftsmen that do steel fabrication, carpenters, styrofoam lamination. And then there's a lot of support people that come in and paint and put all the coatings, and they clean the float. Every float has to be scrubbed clean before, you know, it's been sitting all year. Even if it was painted 6 months ago, it has to be scrubbed clean. The materials we use we don't really have very many materials that are made for this industry, or at least now. When they did the plastic flow sheeting, that was a parade material. But we use steel, plywood, styrofoam, various coatings, paint, and we also, like I said before, we salvage junk motors out of cars, and we make these self-propelled floats that, and they're about 50 feet long. We take the air conditioner motor off, and we put a hydraulic pump in its place. The belt runs huge movements like the wings and all. And then let's get to the sculpture and painting. Now, I'm going to show you quite a few of these, and I'm just going to talk us through. But, you know, this is going to be a cow, and you see there's a structure of steel because styrofoam does not have its own strength. And we draw right on slabs of styrofoam, and we laminate it together and bulk it up. And then we go in with knives, chainsaws, hot wires, and we carve and file. And you can see as it's getting cleaned up here. Now this particular sculpture was done by our full-time sculptor, Skip Kreisel, and he's not in here today. And then our painter comes in and he starts building paint. Now this is Brooke, our painter, scenic painter, and that's the finished cow. And then, well, I'm going to show you some elephants that we've made. We have these box cars, so it's like a zoo of zoo animals, a zoo train, and these great big box cars that we put these animals in. And you can see the thing all bulked up in styrofoam, and then he actually even named the guy Eugene. See there? And we get real personal with this stuff as we build it. But you know, and then it's cleaned up until you have this character. And then, of course, there's coatings put on them to protect the styrofoam from volatile paint, you know, spray paints, and because they have solvent-based paints, and then they're painted. And here's the detail of the eyes. And this was the elephant actually in the box car. There was also a couple of tigers in there. And I think I have the tigers here too. I've got one that was started carving, and then this was all clean and styrofoam. I love them when they're white, you know, before we paint them. But then when we paint them, they look pretty darn good too. So, and you know, we're pretty excited about this. Okay, now this is one that I did a few years ago. I wanted to do Mount Rushmore, so I did a small clay model, and then I started roughing the clay in. This is Jefferson, as you'll be able to tell as we go here. Okay, and then, you know, Mount Rushmore, there's 4 presidents. This is what it kind of looks like as I'm going, glued up and partially carved before we put them together. This is Teddy Roosevelt, go through the process of carving him. And then in the finish, they were mounted. Now all the stone and rock and mountain down below is not in here yet, but you can see that it's being carved as this photograph was taken. And now on the other side of the float, this is a 2-sided float. And on the other side of the float, I didn't want to make the same thing again. And if you put them on the back of the float, when they go by, you're going to see the side of it, and then you're not going to see it anymore. So people could experience it on both sides. Well, they get a different experience on one side or the other, because on the other side, I made them all smile. Now, one thing I realized while carving these is these are not the old fuddy-duddies that were presidents. These were young men that Mount Rushmore is actually sculptures of these men in their youth. And that was something that just didn't occur to me until I was really into it. And now this thing here, this is an old Indian motorcycle, and this was made for one of the self-propelled floats because the float was actually driven by a guy sitting on this thing. The handlebars were hooked to a chain that went over to the steering column, so the guy could drive the float with the handlebars, and it was a car wash or car hop. It was a car hop thing where the cars were all hydraulically moving, and we had people skating around the float with styrofoam fake food trays, and they were skating around like car hops. And actually the throttle was actually a Harley Davidson throttle, and the brakes and everything were on there for this guy. And then, you know, I talked about having to make the best out of something that already exists. Well, then we took this entire float into the future, and that became a personal rocket ship. And then instead of the cars, we had rocket ships on the back of the float. So, and then I'm going to show you one. Now, and there's a little story that goes with this one too that's not a good story. We built these hippos in styrofoam, blocked them up. There was actually 3 of them. One was sitting in a hot tub, one was laying on a massage table, and it was a spa, and one was standing in the shower. Well, and this is the one that was laying on the massage table. They're getting painted here. Is that the last one of that? Yeah. These were never seen by the public. This float burned up totally on the way to the parade in the morning, and totally. And it was really strange because somebody said to me, I couldn't believe it, somebody said, hey, one of the floats are on fire, and of course I just thought I was being heckled again. I'm used to that down there, right? So I walk out on the parking lot and I see a plume of black smoke on Shoto Avenue, and then I just sunk. And another thing really strange about this is the entire float burned except for one little piece of it that was painted. It was up on the top of the shower where it said hot showers. The word hot did not burn. Go figure. Okay, now after seeing I always wanted to make puppets. Like I was at a festival once, I saw these great big fish over the crowd, people walking, and over the crowd, these great big fish were moving, and it was people with poles. And I always thought, well, I'd love to do something like that, but what do you do with the operator when you're not in a crowd of people? You know, it just looked like fish going over a crowd of people. Well, then Lion King came out, and it kind of got permission for the operator to be part of the puppet. So then we started making these big puppets, wrong way, and they're on a backpack. The feet are connected to the guy's feet, and he's got the hands, and he could walk down the street and operate them. And then we had to turn them into something different. So they turned into island girls and then island guys, you know, for another theme. And there's actually a handle on this girl's skirt, so you can shake her skirt like the Tahitian dancers, you know. So okay, now we have a costume department. And the costume department puts 600 costumes on the street. And when I show you pictures of parade morning, you'll see it. 60 or 80 costumes are new every year. And we just have stores and stores of costume pieces and parts to build from. And this is the costume department this is parade ready. And then, of course, we have a sewing room, and we have full-time seamstress, and we have, or a designer, and then we have seamstresses come in throughout the year. Now, I've got something here. I don't have near what I wish I had. Some of these things are hard to recover, but we have volunteer days at the Den, and this is the VP people who are paying for the parade, who give this gift to the city. They bring their families in and they work on the floats, and they do anything from painting to coding. Lots of kids come in. I give them all jobs, and this is one picture of a man sculpting, but one year we made 600 pieces of fruits and vegetables for an open market float. Or we do a toy store and we make models, and then these kids come in and they make all the toys. And they coat them and paint them, and it's like the whole float ends up being a volunteer project. We have a Q team that come in and cook lunch for everybody every day. And I was told, I think he pads this sometimes, but I was told that he served 360 meals last year. So you guys know Campbell, a lot of you, our Q team guy. But really, some days I have 40 volunteers. We have about 8 days, 10 days. Some days I have 80 people. And we got to come up with all kinds of projects to keep them busy all day. And in this way, it's a public event, not only in its conception and its construction, but then it is in the presentation when we're out on the street. So we also, and this is great. These kids, I only had 3 brooms, and the other one was so upset, and I gave him a shovel, and he was happy. They clean up. We make such big messes. Now this is one thing I didn't cover that I don't have any pictures of. We have rehearsals. Last year, we had 14 floats with entertainment on it. So several Saturdays before the parade, every hour, sometimes there's 2 and 3 floats rehearsing at the same time, and we have live bands that support this. And the live bands started maybe about 20 years ago, and then about 4 or 5 years ago, I got a choreographer, and she started designing dance routines that go with the theme of the float. So we have big rehearsals on the float of the dancing, and I'm going to get to that. I've got performance on float a little bit here. But right now, this is the morning at the Den. This is the Den where we build the floats, and like I said, there's 500-600 people in here milling about. This group was an idea I had. We had a travel theme. Everybody needs a vacation, Nelson. And so I got this idea to make fun of ourselves and have the iconic traveler. So we had 20 couples that were dressed the same, and it was kind of like Where's Waldo? Every float had an iconic American traveler on it. And so, lots of blondes, lots of sunglasses, matching outfits, like this is probably what we look like to Europeans, I guess. I don't know. And then lots of groups. We have walking puppeteers. We have lots of walking groups that interact with the crowd. Like these young ladies are with a float, and they go up and interact with the little kids. And we have groups that are giving away candy, and we have baseball groups, and kids go home with bags. They arrive with bags to fill up with giveaways at the float. And we have a big makeup team in there doing everybody with makeup. Now, I'm moving right now to the assembly area. And the assembly area, these are pictures of float crews that are on their given float in their costume. Now, I always have my family set up. They could go to the reviewing stand, but they generally set up on the curb a block or 2 from the parade because I want them to come over to assembly, because assembly is just really cool. All these people in costumes. There's 4 areas: marching bands, horse groups, floats, non-BP units, and it all comes together. It's just exciting just to walk through there. It's like like another planet almost. But, and we have all these great groups. This was a Bollywood theme we did on the riverboat last year. I see a couple faces on here that are here today. We had a ballet float, and the girls were on either side of the mirror, and they were mirroring each other like the old Marx Brothers skit, to where they were each other's reflection while they were dancing on the ballet bar. This was, we had, the band on this float was actually puppets. And we had gypsies, and we had dancing, and that's the one the girls walked with, the little horses. We have one of the walking units. Now I'm moving into marching bands. We have a marching band contest every year that, where they all compete with one another. And at the end, there's a big ceremony, and there's cash prizes. And that's been really cool for quite some time. I don't know how many years. That's been going on ever since I've been around. And it's still very healthy. One thing that happens at the parade is a lot of the families seem to have like a family tradition of going to the same place. You know, we'll meet you on the corner, the same corner as last year. I don't even know what the name of the street is, you know, and they find their way there. Now I've got a little, well, I'm going to go through these marching band pictures, and everybody loves a marching band, and you can see these kids are having fun, and we try to get them not to, if they're from the north, we try to get them to come in summer outfits instead of their winter woolens, because you know 4th of July in St. Louis can be 100 degrees plus. But some of the expressions on the face of these kids I love. And that's the last one of that. Now I'm going to go to performance on floats. Now this has been something I've really been excited about, because this made me, it's like it's to make the parade new, to make it something different. So and this has grown over the past 5 or 6 years. We started with one choreographer, and now we have 3, and they all work together, and they get a rehearsal started, and they move to another float, to another rehearsal, and all this is going on now. And this float was just outstanding when we were televised this year, and it looked really good on television too. These girls this is from our costume department with these beautiful dresses. This was the ballet float with the girls pointing on the bar, and the girls in front were well, they're not right in this photo, but they were primping in each other's reflection, because it was supposed to be 2 sides of a mirror. And for the most part, it worked. This was a float 2 years ago where we had jukebox, and we had, and a lot of these kids you see performing on here, a lot of them are the organization's young girls, and a lot of those have dance experience, and a lot of these girls and these boys too are Muni teens. Like, I can generally get any Muni teen that's not in a show that week, and it's kind of a sliding scale. So it's a moving target. So, you know, sometimes we don't know till the last minute what we're going to get. This was a big Bollywood dance, and this was one of my favorites. This was a Moulin Rouge, and the girls were really talented, and they did things that a body shouldn't be able to do, but they were just so fun. It was just so fun. And then, like, pretty much the last thing you see at the parade is a flyby. Now this was a great photograph. I think this was taken by Tom. He's an architect. Yep. Somebody help me. Huh? Tom Tyler took this photograph. Now, you know, the military carries this great big flag stretched out, and he got under that flag and shot the flying fortress as it went by. This is vintage World War II flying fortress that flew over for us this year. And we have a lot of spectator interaction. Something that I really think is cool that happens is there's a group of about 100. Something that I really think is cool that happens is there's a group bigger. And they wait, you know, they're spectators, and they wait in one spot, and they set up like an ambush area, and then one of our groups come along with squirt guns and and they meet them, and they get out in the street, and they have this great big battle. And it was on the television production, on the televised portion of it. But we have a lot of interaction. It's like when we put live bands, something I first noticed, when we put live bands on a float, when the float goes down the street, it's like a wave of energy. And, you know, people stand up, and you can just feel the whole concept of the float going down the street, and it connects like better than the most beautiful floats I used to build 15 years ago. It just wakes people up, you know. And so we try to cover multi-mediums of art, you know, through visual and performance with music and dance, and it's all folded into a concept that makes some kind of a statement about pop art, or it helps you remember something, or maybe look into the future, or just have fun. It's entertaining and it's very fun. So somebody said that in an interview or in a production you should show, you know, how well did it succeed, right? Did this event succeed? Well, I really feel like it does. We have 100,000 plus watch the parade. They come back every year. The year it was raining in the morning, we postponed the parade for an hour. Everybody came out. It's like where did all these people come from? They were waiting until it stopped raining, and they came out and saw the parade anyway. And like I say, it's just a way to revisit good old times, or maybe look into the future. And the themes of the floats vary significantly, from sometimes fun, sometimes patriotic, sometimes commemorative, and it's just really fun. So that's pretty much it. And I would love questions if anybody has any. And of course I'm going to invite you all to come to the parade next year. I hope that those of you who aren't already involved or haven't been before will come and have this experience with us. Thank you, Lisa.
Does anyone have any questions?
Well, if you look close, this is the flamboyant. Now, I've been to a parade in New Orleans where they actually have these things where they're made out of glass, and they have like about 6 or 8 flames in them, and they carry them alongside the float with illuminated floats. And this would have been the first step rock parade. This would have been from New Orleans on Gardens. And I guess this is fireworks. I don't know. Yeah, this would be fireworks. And of course, this is a long time ago. This was, you know, in the newspapers they used to illustrate these things. You know, and they didn't have photographs back then. In 1878.
Were you working there then?
No, but when I started 42 years ago, I was only 5 years old. Oh, Lisa.
So, how do you decide what the individual books are going to be like every year? So when you're going from the bunny to the cat to the dog, what is it that makes you decide to go on?
Well, every year we have a grand marshal. He's here today. Bill. And there's several ex-grand marshals here as well. And they come up with the theme. Now, I have a couple of sheets that have suggestions. Some of them use and some don't. A couple of years I haven't been touched. They just come in with me. And then once I'm given a theme, and they tell me they feel they can, I tell them I feel I can work with that. Generally, we try to keep things kind of open, because we are trying to work with what's, in a practical sense, trying to work with what's in the den. And and then I just start going through it. I used to, there was a time when I started with my best and strongest ideas, and we build those first, and then everything else fell into what time was left with the time allocation of labor and craftsmen. And then it got to be where I started looking more at what was on the floats and designing from that angle. Well, now for 4 or 5 years, I design from, you know, how can I entertain people with this other art, performance art. So, so I try to hook up concepts with floats that work with something. I spend a lot of time on YouTube, looking at dance and listening to music a lot on Amazon MP3, and just listening to lots of different kinds of music. Now, a lot of this stuff is, some of the music is copyrighted, so we send it through a clearinghouse, you know, so we do everything legal, and which is something that's really hard to do. Like, say, if somebody kicks out a children's literature theme. Now, that sounds like a great thing for a parade, right? Because for the most part, it's a children's parade. But how many children's books are actually in public domain? None of the popular ones. So, so that's a difficult one to design around. So we try to knock around, even like with Disney characters, you try to see what the appeal is and why the success was there, and then you put something out there that's as good as that, only it doesn't have the marketing backing it. But the marketing does help the consciousness of this particular style or feeling that you're trying to convey. And so people have this communication in mind. You know, I want to say one thing, like floats, you have to get it right away. Sometimes you narrate with you know, we write things, we put signs and banners, but, you know, the float goes by any given person in about 2 minutes. So you got to get the whole thing in 2 minutes. Now, we stop in front of the television camera and spend a little more time there. With the entertainment floats in particular.
I want to expand on that answer about the theme. Yes, the Grand Marshal is responsible for the final say-so on the theme, so a lot of it starts right there.
Oh, well, thank you. Toby's our parade starter and ex-Grand Marshal.
Tell me, is there a year or a theme, specific float that you were just most proud from an artistic standpoint?
Well, I've got favorites over the years. My favorite all-time theme, just because it had so much meaning, was a salute to the volunteers. A salute to volunteers, not our volunteers, but just volunteers in general. You know, I was handed by a very generous Grand Marshal. It was before I really learned how to get around and you know, on a computer and the information highway, and I was handed a pile of information on volunteer statistics, and it was really fun and meaningful building from that theme. Now I'm more excited about something that really fits with some kind of great entertainment, because that just hits and connects with the spectators better and more than anything I've come up with in all my years of the creative process. Well, that's it happened kind of slow, you know, kind of gradual. I didn't really have an ambition to design the floats or conceptualize the floats when I was the sculptor there. I was pretty happy with that for 17 years, and then, but when the opportunity came up, I said, well, I'll give it a try. And I designed my first 3 parades. I didn't even allow myself a desk. I'd sit on the edge of the table and design my first 3 years, and then I'd finally decide, you know, I think this is going to be me. And so I got myself a nice slant desk that I could draw and figure things out on.
At what age did you really feel an artistic bent? Obviously, long before.
What is it? Sorry.
An artistic bent. I mean, 3, 4, 5 years old. When did you feel you
Well, you know, I was never, you know, when I look back, there were some things I made when I was a kid, and but I was never recognized. And in high school, you could either have band or art, visual art. So I was in the band, and I didn't really I started studying, I was going to be an electrical engineer. And I made the mistake of visiting an art class with some hippies I lived with, right? and I fell in love with it the first night. And like so the next semester I took a drawing class. And then the next semester I took a sculpture class. And then the next semester I was supporting myself as a sculptor. I made it happen that quick. And so I didn't really know. But then when I look back, well, I was big in the industrial arts department in high school. I got the gold hammer 1 year because I designed and built something. And but that was just, I wish somebody back then would have told me to look into industrial arts. Like if you're good at it, do it. And that's what this is. It's a mix of lots of different kinds of art. And I love it. I can hear you. Your most challenging theme? My most challenging thing? This year's? No. You know what? I don't know. The answers don't all come right away, and sometimes I'm waiting for answers right to the last minute. You also never know who is going to do what for you. Like I have things I want to make. And I don't have time to make them or anybody to make them. And I've been really lucky. I have, like here's one of my painters, my volunteer painters. Right? she comes in and paints. She's an artist, a degree from WashU. And she's a painter. Jenny Echo. The theme for this year, can we tell that? It's a time-sensitive theme, and the theme is it's about time. So that's what we're looking at, is all kinds of things about time, past, present, future, or timeless, and we're actually going to do Rocky Horror Picture Show, the Time Warp. And I was afraid to do that one, but everybody wanted to do it anyway. And I go, like the choreographer. And the Grand Marshal, oh, I love that, So. Yeah, we're taking auditions this afternoon. We got outfits in the back here. Oh, we're going to have to calm it down a little bit. There's a group called Glee or something on, I don't know what they're called. There's some kind of, remember Glee Club in high school? Well, there's some group called the Glee Club or whatever that they do versions of lots of different musicals. And I think it's some kind of not-for-profit group, but, I think we're going to get away with it. we already got guys who wear dresses in the parade. Actually, just one, I guess, Snow White.
Do you see any connection, or does the work with the Valerie parade have any connection to your own paintings? Do they inform each other?
Well, just my, my paintings look like sculptures. I mean, you can see my paintings over at Bruno David Gallery, and I like, and they're big. I like to paint big. I've been trying to paint smaller because nobody in St. Louis buys big paintings. Yet. But it's all connected. I started with dance because of the models. Some of the models at Washington U were dancers, and I kind of got interested in dance because they move, the way they move. So then I started going to Dance St. Louis, and I've held Dance St. Louis tickets for 35 years at least now, maybe more. And just my love of dance. But my paintings are more like, I call them abstract paintings, but I'm using a photorealistic figure that I'm painting to make a design, an abstract design on the canvas. And so a lot of times you look at it and you don't know what you're looking at because of the way I've cropped it, the way a photographer would crop it, and it's up close in your face. And I'm looking for a strong design. something where the white and the white, I was painting white and black, now I'm painting in color, to where the white of the canvas and the color of the black struggle for prominence in the design. And anyway, you'll just have to look at that at Bruno David's website and draw your own conclusions. So, any more questions?